Welcome back. It is time to look back on Saturday night, and what a night it was for Anthony Joshua, who delivered a dramatic 7th round finish to stop a pretty game Alexander Povetkin at Wembley Stadium. He retained his unified belts and looked pretty impressive in doing so. Matt Christie from Boxing News, the editor of Boxing News, joins us on the line. Matt, I was just listening back earlier on to Eddie Hearn's post-match interview, and he was speaking in the wake of that fight, pointing out how less than ideal Joshua's preparations for Saturday night had been.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is with Anthony Joshua, he's always as well conditioned as any heavyweight can be. I don't think we've seen a heavyweight in such good condition for such a long time. But it was certainly clear in the early rounds that Joshua perhaps looked a little flat. The atmosphere was oddly different to the previous Joshua carnivals that we'd seen as well. It wasn't just the rain. It wasn't just the soporific undercard either. There was something strange in the air, and Joshua did exceptionally well to get through those first few rounds and get the victory. I thought in the end, with the finish, with the quality of opponent, it's one of Joshua's best performances. Because
he did rattle him, Povetkin, in those opening rounds, and Joshua's nose kind of told the tale of that, and he did well to shrug that aside and eventually come through as decisively as he did.
Yeah, I mean, certainly in that opening round, when his knees dipped a little bit from that uppercut and subsequent right hand, the warning signs were there. Povetkin, a lot of casual fans didn't really know much about Povetkin other than he'd failed drug tests, other than he'd been cast as this Russian villain. But he's a very accomplished opponent, very, very capable. And he showed that Joshua, and we saw again that Joshua is not invincible. And in a way, that's why it was such a good fight, really, because not only did it entertain and did it thrill and Joshua looked good, it would have given potential opponents really incentive to get in the ring with him.
Yeah, the prospective opponents are lining up. What kind of chinks in the armour are there if you're a Deontay Wilder or if you're a Tyson Fury looking on at Saturday's win for Joshua?
I mean, do you know what? I mean, Deontay Wilder would have been licking his lips in those opening few rounds when Joshua was getting caught. You could easily envision a case of one of those punches that were just missing, that Wilder would connect and Joshua would go down and out. Equally, there were times when Povetkin was being very clever, very wise, very wily, and you could imagine Tyson Fury boxing rings around him. But in the same regard, and the flip side of that, of course, is how Joshua finished. And you could also easily conjure up images of Wilder or Fury flat on his back with Joshua with his arms in the air.
Yeah, Matt, does you mentioned there, you said like one of his more impressive performances, but does it not, as you say in those early stages, ask more questions or put more questions to Anthony Joshua now than going forward, or is it just he's got through that fight? That's another test he's overcome in his short career so far.
Well, I think the crucial word there is short. It is a short career, and people forget that he came along after winning the Olympic gold in 2012. Already a household name, already with high expectations, but high expectations doesn't always lead to matching accomplishments. I mean, we've seen that with Audley Harrison. We've seen it to a lesser extent with David Price as well, who came out of the Olympics with a bronze medal. Amateur potential doesn't always lead to what Joshua has achieved. What he's achieved in 22 fights is nothing short of exceptional. And if we break it down a little further, 4 stadium fights, and the guys he's beaten, if we go back through, he's already beaten Dillian Whyte, Vladimir Klitschko, Dominique Breazeale, Alexander Povetkin. These are all guys that are in the top 10. They're learning fights for him for sure. But I think in regards, will people kind of pick holes in it? Of course they will. But we do have to remember that Joshua is 28 years old and he's still really a novice at this. And that on its own is sensational.
One thing I noticed, Matt, just in and around the language of the fight in terms of Joshua, I don't know if it's just me, he seemed, I don't want to say cocky, it's probably the wrong word, but he seemed a far more self-assured boxer than he has done in recent times. The humble Anthony Joshua wasn't necessarily as prevalent in and around this fight, particularly in the aftermath. And just like he was using terms like, I was looking at Povetkin and I was thinking like he ain't got shit. I'm kind of thinking this isn't necessarily the Christian, God-fearing Anthony Joshua that we'd known when he'd started off and coming out of 2012.
No, well, did that Anthony Joshua ever really exist? I mean, he's media savvy. He's certainly been educated in how to present himself in certain ways. We also have to remember that he's certainly one of the most famous athletes on the planet, most certainly in this country, and he must be exceptionally difficult to keep your feet on the ground, particularly when everything is going your way. But moving forward for Anthony Joshua, I think he's got every right to be cocky. He's got every right to presume that he's the leading heavyweight in the world because his accomplishments far outweigh his closest rivals. We can look at Deontay Wilder and even predict that Deontay Wilder might beat him, but what Deontay Wilder has done on paper pales in comparison to what Anthony Joshua has done. Tyson Fury, likewise. Tyson Fury, for a while there, was the people's champion. When he came back, everybody was delighted. Let's get him in the ring with Joshua. But, again, no disrespect to either of those two guys. Their achievements do not match up to what Anthony Joshua has done.
There's a 13th of April date circled in Anthony Joshua's calendar, and one man who banks on being there at Wembley Stadium, it would seem, for that as well, is one Mr. Tyson Fury.
I think it's safe to say now that not Team Joshua or Matchroom will ever fight the Gypsy King. Never. They mentioned if it's not Wilder, it'll be Whyte. There's no mention of Tyson Fury, the lineal heavyweight champion of the world. It's all right fighting men 38-year-old. Today is pure evidence that I'm fighting the best heavyweight out there in Deontay Wilder. Joshua's not even close. He's slow, methodical, ponderous at times. Powerful, yes, but they all are. Very, very clear to say, avoid me at all costs. If I was you, Joshua, I'd avoid me, because I will jab your face off. You bum. You're a bum dosser. Hashtag bum city. Can't box. Jab your nut in. Easy night's work.
The shine retiring Tyson Fury there, Matt. There is a kernel of a point there. There are aspects of Fury's ring game that would cause Joshua some problems were they to meet next April.
Without question. And in all honesty, I thought it was a little bit disrespectful that Tyson Fury's name wasn't mentioned more frequently in the aftermath. There seemed to be a presumption perhaps on the surface that Deontay Wilder will do the business against Tyson Fury, but I think more than anything there's an underlying hope that Deontay Wilder will do the business and perhaps they don't have to deal with Tyson Fury in the future. I think Tyson Fury, for every single heavyweight out there, is their worst nightmare stylistically. But it's certainly no given that he'll get past Deontay Wilder. I'm still swaying from one way to the other as to who's going to win that fight. But without question, if Tyson Fury is the Tyson Fury that he was a few years ago, and we haven't seen complete evidence of that yet, let's not forget. But if he is that same heavyweight he was a few years ago, the guy that beat Derek Chisora to a pulp after 10 rounds, the guy that really surprised everyone against Vladimir Klitschko, then he would be an enormous proposition for Anthony Joshua.
I was going to say, if and when that fight does go ahead, because it still probably is a big if between Fury and Wilder, will that fight go ahead then with Joshua? Is that what we're looking at then, realistically, down the line?
Joshua.
Yeah.
Sorry, are we looking at Joshua?
Well, Joshua and the winner of that fight, if that fight were to take place between Wilder and Fury.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's quite difficult.
Is it that simple, mate, basically?
It should be. It really should be that simple. It should be. I mean, what we were all saying beforehand, before the Joshua Povetkin fight, is okay. We've got Joshua Povetkin, which is arguably 1 versus 3, and then we've got Wilder number 2 against Tyson Fury, who is the former world heavyweight champion. So it would make sense for the winners of each then to face off. Now, what we're hearing is that unless a deal can be done before that fight, before Wilder and Fury fight. It won't happen in April. Now, you can understand that from Eddie Hearn's point of view. He's already been into negotiations with Deontay Wilder. They were long and winding. There was blame on both sides for that not happening. However, to kind of put the ball in Deontay Wilder's court quite like that, I feel is a little bit unfair at this stage. To ask him to take his focus away from Tyson Fury, which is by far the biggest fight of his career, and go away and work out some negotiations with Anthony Joshua, is just completely unrealistic. They said they're not going to wait until December to negotiate with the winner of Wilder Fury. It must be done beforehand. That just isn't fair on either Wilder or Fury, to be perfectly honest with you. Why they can't wait until after the fight happens, so it's December 1st, there would still be 5 months build up for April 13th. I'm not completely sure.
they're suggesting that Joshua's obviously going to have a bit of time off between now and then, but that's what I'm kind of scratching my head at, because if it isn't, on the surface, if it isn't Wilder, if that deal doesn't get done, and if they have no interest in fighting Tyson Fury, then suddenly you've got a 5-month build-up to a fight that people, with Joshua against who knows, that isn't necessarily going to be a big draw.
I think the only way it could be a big draw, and the big draw that they want, is if they can, if it's Dillian Whyte. Now, again, that's not an awful fight. The first fight carried just enough intrigue. That grudge can be rehashed again, and it will sell, and it's a British rivalry, etc., etc. But it's not the fight that the fans want. In regards to Dillian Whyte as well, I mean, as we understand it, he's in talks for a rematch himself with Derek Chisora. So all this talk that they need to know the opponent before December, well, they can't possibly if it's going to be Dillian Whyte, particularly if he's going ahead with that Derek Chisora rematch, because Derek Chisora could upset the apple cart there. So there's a lot of things that just don't quite ring true with this. Ultimately, I think that we're probably going to have to accept that Deontay Wilder nor Tyson Fury will be in the opposite corner in April the 13th. And if we look back through heavyweight history, that's fine. Joshua is 28. Wilder's still young. Fury's still young enough for it to happen down the line. But the time when the alarm bells really should be ringing about not getting the fight we want is if this time next year we've just watched Joshua beat somebody that isn't Tyson Fury or Deontay Wilder.
Yeah, December 1st will probably tell a tale. Matt Christie from Boxing News, thank you so much for taking time out to speak to us this evening.